Okay, so you got your sheet of paper out, right? And the title for today is Algebra versus Geometry Day 1. So I want you to write at the top of your paper, Algebra versus Geometry Day 1. And the first question, I'll hand out the sheet in a minute, but I want your answers on your notebook paper. So the first question is letter A. It's kind of weird. It doesn't start with number 1. And the first question is, you don't have to write this down, what is an equation? So if you're willing to answer, raise your hand. What is an equation? Yes. You're Caleb? Yes. Okay, so it's a bunch of numbers and maybe also some letters that has an equal sign in it. So it's a math sentence that has an equal sign. So this is the first question was, what is an equation? And the first answer, that's what you're writing down, is it's a math sentence that has an equal sign. Okay, and I'm also going to write an example. So let's say something like this, 3x plus 4 equals x plus 8. That's an example of equation. It's got some letters and numbers, like Caleb said, and it's got a couple plus signs. It could have a subtraction sign in it, or maybe division. So this is a mathematical sentence that has an equal sign in it. So it's called an equation. Okay? Question B is, what does it mean to solve an equation? So we've got an equation here. Let's say the direction said solve. What would it mean to solve the equation? Yes. Lawson. So to get one answer, good. All right, so solve means find the answer. So let's write that down, and then there's a little bit more to it, but nice work. Okay, now what does the answer do? Like, how do you know if it's how could you check to see if it's the right answer? Yes, Logan?
If you plug it back in, so it'll be equal.
Yeah, you could plug it back in for the letter, right? And see if it comes out equal, see if it's true. So it's find the answer, which means find the number that makes the equation true. So find the number that makes it true. So the first question was, what is an equation? And that's a math sentence that has an equal sign. And then the second question was, what does it mean to solve the equation? And that's find the number that makes it true. Okay, so this is a little bit tricky. Can anybody tell what the solution is for this equation? Is it Frank? Yes. All right, good. X equals 2 is the correct answer. Nice work. And so to check and see, I mean, it is right, but just to show you, you could plug the 2 back in here, right? And that would be 3 times 2, which is 6. And then 6 plus 4 is 10. And then 2 plus 8 is also 10. So if you plug a 2 into this side, you get 10. If you plug a 2 into that side, you get 10. And so it makes the equation true, because 10 does equal 10. So this is the correct solution. Nice work, Frank. So I'm just curious, did you just kind of trial and error stuff, or did you do some fancy stuff you learned last year? It doesn't matter. You did fancy stuff? So what was the fancy stuff you did?
Well, I subtracted x from both sides.
Yeah, like you subtract the x over, right?
And then
Subtract the 4 over. So you can do fancy stuff. Or sometimes you can just tell what the answer is. Like maybe somebody tried 1 and it didn't work, and then tried 2 and it worked. So keep in mind that's what a solution is. or that's what it means to solve. Okay, so now we're on to letter C. And letter C says, what is the solution to an equation? So the solution is the number that makes the equation true. So B said, the question was, what does it mean to solve? And that means find the number. And then the number is called the solution. So this question was, what is the solution? And that's the number that makes the equation true. Okay, so it's kind of hard to follow along if I'm only asking the questions out loud. So I'm going to pass out the paper now so you can look at it. But I'm just going to give you one per pair of people. So you both look at the questions together, and then you write your answers on your own piece of paper, okay? And if you're watching this at home, you should have this piece of paper out so you know what the questions are, right? Because I'm not writing down the questions. Okay, so now we're ready for letter D. It's on the back. So letter D says, what does the graph of an equation represent? So you have to think back to last year. Sorry about that, but do you remember what a graph represents? Okay, that's all right. That's kind of tricky. So what a graph is it's a picture of all of the solutions. A graph is a picture of all the solutions. So for this equation, the graph would be very boring, actually, because it would just be a line with one dot, because there's only one solution. But maybe a different equation has two solutions, and then the graph would be a little more interesting. It would be two dots. But then there are other equations that have lots and lots of solutions, right? So sometimes you put all those dots on a graph, and then you connect them, and maybe it makes a straight line or a parabola. So that's what that represents. It represents a dot for all the answers. Okay, so that's what a graph is. It's a picture of all the solutions. Okay, so now there's this table thing that we're going to fill out. I don't want you to write down all the words and everything. I just want you to write the numbers. But keep the odd numbers in the left column and keep the even numbers in the right column. So we're going to do 1 and 3 and 5 and 7 and 9 and 11 on the left, and then 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 on the right. And we're going to do all of the odd ones first, because at the top of the column for odd, it's talking about linear equations. So all of these answers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11, are going to have to do with linear equations. And I figured out earlier today that it makes the most sense to start with number 5, because that's what people are able to answer. So number 5 is talking about the graph. So raise your hand if you can tell me what the graph of a linear equation is. Yeah, Trey? Oh, you weren't raising your hand? Okay, I'm sorry. So what is anybody know what the graph of a linear equation looks like? Okay, linear means, you want to try, Caleb?
I was going to say it's a line.
It's a line, yeah. Linear is a fancy way of saying it's a straight line. So in number 5, I just want you to graph a straight line. So if it's a linear equation, it's going to look something like this. It could be slanted differently. It could be going down instead of up, or it could be flat. But if it's a linear equation, then it's going to be a straight line. Okay, so now we have to go up to number 1, and it is asking for what the general form of the equation is. And for a line, the general form is y equals mx plus b. So that's, if you have the equation of a line, that's what it's going to look like. Now maybe the m is 2 and the b is 5. So it would be y equals 2x plus 5. Or maybe it's a different one where the m is a half and the b is negative 2. So then it says y equals negative a half plus 2 or something like that. So every line, though, is going to look like this. So that's called the general form for it. Okay, then number 3 is asking for the highest power on the variable. So the variable is x, and it's just to the first power. So for a linear equation, the highest power of the variable is going to be the first power. And that's just because this is x to the first power. Is everybody doing okay? Remember, it's actually, I'm actually impressed when you admit you don't know things. Like yesterday, I was impressed you were willing to write stuff you didn't know on the note card. So it'll make the class more interesting. Maybe not on tape, you're not willing to do that. I get that. Okay. All right, so for number 7, it says, what are the rules and the methods for solving? So we kind of already talked about that when Frank solved this, right? So when you solve a linear equation, you subtract variables and subtract numbers, or maybe add some numbers. Okay, so add and subtract letters and numbers. So number 7 is asking, how do you solve a linear equation? And so on this one, you would subtract the x over, and you would subtract the 4 over. After you do that, you get this, right? 2x equals 4. And then the last step is to divide the 2. So that's what you would do as well. You would divide. So that's how you solve a linear equation. Okay, then number 9 says how many solutions are there going to be for a linear equation? So we only got one answer, right? So there's only one answer for a linear equation. And then finally, number 11 asks for an example of a linear equation. So it's okay if you use my example that I have over there, but I'd be more impressed if you could come up with one on your own. But either way, you'll be right. But now would be a time where you could take a risk and impress me. So write down some example of a linear equation. One possible answer is this one right here. But it would be good to come up with your own. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the second column. And the second column talks about quadratic equations. So you probably have heard that word in algebra, but maybe, it's been a couple months since you were in algebra. Maybe it's been 3 or 4 months since you talked about quadratics. So it's okay if you don't remember what a quadratic is. But if you do, well, can you tell me anything like the general form or the highest power on the variable or the graph? Or methods for solving. Maybe it's easiest to start with the graph. Does anybody know what the graph of a quadratic equation looks like? Cecilia, do you know? It's curved. It's not a straight line. That's good. And what kind of a curve is it, Rebecca? It's called a parabola. Nice. So that would be number 6. The graph of a quadratic looks like a parabola. It could be up or down. So yeah, all this stuff is somewhere in your head, but it's hard to get it out at the start of school, I get it. Okay, so that's the graph of a quadratic. And the general form of a quadratic is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So it's more complicated because it's got x squared instead of just x. So that's why you did it later in the year last year. So then I've already kind of given away the highest power on the variable is 2 because there's an x squared. With the linear equation, it was just x to the first power, wherever the x was. But here, in a quadratic, there's an x to the second power, so that's what makes it quadratic. Okay, number 8's asking about methods for solving. So how do you solve a quadratic? Let's go to the example first. So let's say it was x squared plus 7x plus 6 equals 0. So since you didn't know how to solve it, I thought it might jog your memory if I wrote down an example. And it looks like that did help. So sorry to skip around. That's number 12. This is an example of a quadratic equation. So that seemed to... So Philip, do you know how to... Okay, good. You always try to combine like terms. And that would have happened here, right? Where you subtracted the x over. Awesome. Here, though, I've already got them all combined. But that's a good comment. Like they're x squareds and x's are not like terms. Sometimes it seems like they are. But if it was both x squared, then you could add them. Or both x's. But these are already combined. But yes, definitely do that. Any other ideas on how to solve this type of an equation? Okay, one thing you can do is this, and that's called factoring, which you all loved. I'm being sarcastic, you didn't love that at all. Even if you remember it all, you know you didn't like it. So one way to solve a quadratic is to factor. We're not going to actually factor this one today. I'm just trying to remind you what to do. Maybe tomorrow we might factor it. Depends on how the day goes. Any other methods for solving quadratics besides factoring? There's something called the quadratic formula. And factoring is kind of tough, but the quadratic formula is good if you remember the formula. But if you don't remember the formula, then you don't have a chance with that one, so then you have to try and factor it. Okay. So that's number 8, the methods for solving a quadratic. And then, does anybody know how many solutions there are for a quadratic? Yes, there are 2. Nice work. So there's 2 solutions for a quadratic equation. All right, so we just got a couple more questions to do here. The next one is a letter. It's letter E. So the quadratic formula is used to solve quadratic equations, that is, equations that have x squared in them. And so this is asking, what is the quadratic formula? So this has been a long time. Does anybody have that formula memorized? Or maybe just part of it would be good too. Seems like some people are thinking a little bit. Kylie, what do you got? Good. Okay, you got us started. That's awesome. Thank you. So she's right. It starts out opposite of B, and then Alec, what's next?
Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
Awesome. So, Kylie, you did the hard part. You kind of jogged everybody's memory. You took the risk. Nice work. Got us started, and then a couple other people like, oh yeah, that one. So this is the formula you use to solve equations that look like this, that are quadratic. So this is a quadratic equation, and this is used to solve it, so it's called the quadratic formula. All right. And then letter F. Letter F says, what do you know about the square root of negative numbers? So before we get to that, I want to write down a couple of problems. Let's say we have the square root of 16, and then let's say we have the square root of negative 4. So before we try to answer question F, we're going to try to answer these questions. So let's start with this one, the square root of 16. Good, that answer is 4. All right, awesome. So can you explain why is it 4? Yes?
We multiply 4 and 4 is 16.
So it's the number that you multiply times itself that equals the 16, right? So you could write that down as blank times blank equals 16. Fill in the blank, and the blanks have to have the same number. So that's why it's 4. Okay, so if you were trying to figure out the square root of negative 4, you would do blank times blank equals negative 4, right? That would be the question. And that's kind of a problem, right? Because you could try negative 2, but negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, so that doesn't work. And then you could try positive 2, but positive 2 times positive 2 is positive 4, so that doesn't work either. So then you can say, oh, well, what about one negative and one positive? But the problem with that is these are supposed to be the same number, and those are different numbers. So that means there's no answer. So then letter F says, what do you know about the square roots of negative numbers? It's not possible to take the square root of a negative number. So just write down just a couple words answering question F. Okay, so we got everything done today, right? We did all of these questions, and that's good. So you'll just put your paper in your binder and turn it in first thing tomorrow on the desk over there. Some days there might be a couple questions that I don't finish, and then you'll have to finish those outside of class. And so if that happens, you'll go to Google Classroom to see the problems when you're not here, because I'm not giving you these papers to take with you. But that's kind of nice because then you won't lose the paper, right? You'll be able to see it on Google Classroom whenever you need it. So.